everyone to the Saline Area Schools Board of Education study session for Tuesday, October 22nd, 2019. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Vice President Fanis is on vacation tonight. She will not be joining us. As a reminder, this is the forum for public comment, and part of the policy is that you should fill out the form on your way into the meeting, potentially because you have something to let us know about the agenda items. So if you feel like you need to speak tonight, you need to get the forms to me by time student showcase is done and before public comment begins. We're always interested in to see what the public has to say, but the second public comment is generally there for overflow if we exceed our 30-minute limit on the first public comment. So tonight, student showcase, the first thing we have is the National Merit semifinalists, Principal Rath.
Thanks for having us tonight, and also thank you for supporting our Saline High School Key Club and their Real Men Wear Pink campaign for the month of October. I appreciate that, and for the Breast Cancer Awareness Month. But we're really here to recognize these 10 students that are here, our 10 national semifinalists, more than 1.5 million juniors from about 21,000 high schools enter the 2020 National Merit Scholarship Program by taking their 2018 PSAT test. So about a year ago, last week, they were taking this test, PSAT, to see if they qualified for this national semifinalist recognition. But only 16,000 students actually qualify nationwide and are named semifinalists. And we have 10 of them here tonight, so we'd like to recognize those. We have an outstanding representation from Saline High School. These students are well-rounded, leaders in many different aspects of their high school careers here at Saline. And I'm gonna have them come up, say their name, first and last, and if they have any idea what they're doing going forward after the school year, but a lot of them are still waiting on decisions. So I'm gonna start right here. We'll start with Ian. He loves when I do this.
Hello, my name is Ian Spital. Next year, I'm hoping to get into the University of Michigan and go into some sort of engineering thing there.
Hello, my name is Max Bauer, and I'm hoping to attend Brown University in Rhode Island next year, where I would like to study politics.
Hello, my name is Yulin Lau, and I'm currently undecided about my future plans.
Hello, my name is William Minette. I hope to get into University of Michigan next year and study chemistry and biochemistry.
My name is Holden Collins, and I hope to study engineering next year.
Hello, my name is Eileen Zong. Hopefully I will be studying international relations at Georgetown University next year.
Hi, I'm Chris Van Dyke, and I hope to study engineering at the University of Michigan.
Hi, my name is Grace Prisby, and I plan to study neuroscience next year. Hi, my name is Nikki Dillman. I plan to study engineering next year.
Well, thank you. Any questions for the group?
Group photo, maybe? Over in the corner. If you said there were 10, are we missing one? Or are we miscounted?
We have a band concert tonight. We have a lot of things going on at Saline High School tonight, so I know he was invited, though.
Yeah, if we could get a group photo over there, that would be wonderful. And what's the timeline for interesting whether or not there'll be finalists?
We will hear usually late February on who's the finalists, and so we'll keep you posted on that.
Great.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Congratulations, everybody.
second student showcase was Eagle Scout project by Nick McManama, but I do not see him here yet, so we will table that in case he's running late and go on to public comment. Tammy Carr.
Hi everyone, I was just wanted to stop by and say thank you very much for all the support that we've received with the Chad Tough Foundation or the Saline, from the Saline area schools, specifically around our Run Tough for Chad Tough event. We held our 6th annual event at the high school, and in total, over the 6 years, we've raised over $1 million from this event, and it would not have been possible without the support of the Saline area schools and over 10,000 runners. So thank you guys so much, and because the high school support is so significant around this event, allowing us to use the facilities and being so supportive with everything we need, we want to present this banner that will be showcased at the high school. All of our different schools that support Chad Tough at a certain level get this to hang in the school. So this will be up at the high school. Thank you very much.
Our second public comment is Stephanie Gray.
I just wanted to say thank you. You guys, I wasn't here at your last meeting, but you actually nominated me to the library board. I was out of town, so I couldn't be here. So I wanted to say thank you for that. I'm looking forward to it. It's something I have done before in my previous community. And I also just wanted to voice my support of the group of parents who are pushing in hopes of having class sizes reduced again in the elementary school. So thank you again.
Thank you. Administration.
Just a few quick updates. One really related to the strategic framework. As you know, we were collecting applications for serving on the strategic framework revision group that's getting together. We had 72 applicants, so we had more than applicants than we have spots for. We're currently evaluating, looking at, as you recall, we have 4 goals in the strategic framework. We're looking at assigning based on those 4 goal areas. We are going to need to recruit. We want a balance of community members, staff members on this, and we're looking to recruit a few more staff members to make sure we have some representation across the 4 different goal areas. The kickoff meeting, based on the feedback from collectively from the group that applied, it looks like Mondays will be everything. So we're tentatively targeting Monday, the 18th of November as the first date for that event. And again, that first one will be a large full group kickoff, and then from there, most of the time the groups will meet as individual goal groups in the neighborhood of 17 to 20 individuals involved. Of note, Ann Hurst Kreitz, the executive director from the foundation, could not be here, and with Vice President Faunus out, wanted to thank everyone who attended the tip-off event that occurred last week, and she announced yesterday, I believe Monday, that the event raised $30,000 in support of Saline schools. So those funds will go to the foundation. Appreciate everyone who's contributed to that, and again, they will begin our process really now of a rolling grant cycle. So you will start to hear more and more about the grants that are going to be awarded. So again, thank you for, she wanted to make sure we thanked everyone for their support. Thank you to board members who were in attendance.
Board members? Jennifer?
I wanted to share a little good news nationally and out of Woodland Meadows. So Girls on the Run is a national organization. We've had several sites here in Saline for several years, but we were selected this week to be one of the prototype schools for their new 2nd grade curriculum. So out of 200 organizations or 200 chapters in the United States, Saline was one of the 5. It was Southeastern Michigan was one of the 5, and they contacted me and said they wanted Saline to be one of the prototype schools. So Megan Stevenson will be helping head that up at Woodland Meadows. I'm going to help her kick it off along with Rhonda Fields, our executive director, that we met at a previous board meeting in May. So it's a really big honor for our school district to be selected.
Yep.
Yesterday, Monday, the Writing Center celebrated the National Day on Writing, which I believe was Sunday. For that, at lunch, there was a few opportunities for students to go up and write a Halloween spooky themed story, short stories. They were about 13 words each. There was also opportunities for something called blackout poetry, where it's where you take a book, take a page out of a book, and then you black out a bunch of lines, and then there's only a few words, and that's your poetry, it's your poem. So that went well. The favorited submissions by the Writing Center consultants have been posted on the wall, glass windows for that. Additionally, we also had the wellness committee meeting on the 10th. That went very well, and I'll just remind everybody that on the 24th, which is the 2 days, there will be the first showing of Screenagers. And lastly, I got the chance to speak with some members of the high school marching band, some seniors, who said that they are still concerned with issues being not respected after football games. So I am kind of concerned about that, and I would like to see a little bit of encouragement to get those things straightened out. So that's all.
Okay. There is no responsive public comment tonight. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda as printed?
So moved. Second.
All those in favor, please signify with aye. Aye. Those opposed with nay. Hearing none, the motion carries 6-0. Our study topic tonight is class size report, Superintendent Graydon and Dr. Lodge.
Dr. Lodge might be technical support tonight, I believe.
There you go.
Here we are, we are. All right. A couple of quick notes before I will present and share information tonight. I encourage the board, if you have questions, to let me know. I will be posting this presentation both in PDF form as well as a crude rudimentary screencast that I produced a little bit ago. You'll hear Craig come in to get the trash out of my office partway through the video production. I was on a roll, I didn't want to stop. So I do want people who aren't able to be here tonight not only to have the data involved with the presentation, but also just to hear me talk through a little bit so I can get clarification. And there's also going to be a link if people have questions to be able to share that. The class size update tonight really is going to focus on a few different areas. One is kind of the history associated with class size as it relates to Saline specifically, a little bit about the numbers, and when I talk about the numbers, really looking at this idea of the 10-year averages, the 5-year averages, and the current class sizes associated with, really, to be fair, the focus tonight will be on K-6 class size. And then the process, how do we go about, during the summertime, looking at this issue of building class lists, and then developing the strategy associated with managing enrollment and competing priorities as it relates to resources. And in the future, what are some of the threats associated with class size and managing class size, and what's kind of that path forward? I noted a while ago that I saw the issue as kind of a bump in the road and not this new trajectory that we're on as it relates to class size, and so I'll talk a little bit more about that. First, kind of the history, really the true governing document as it relates to class size and Saline is the SEA agreement. The Saline Education Association is our teachers bargaining unit. We collaboratively bargain, contract have for decades as it relates to it. And class size listed there, that is right out of our collective bargaining agreements. It's posted on our website. Those are the class size maximums for the different grade levels. And we certainly operate within those. And again, as we collaboratively and collectively bargain that, those are the ones that we share conversations around as it relates to it. You'll notice on the end there's this thing called a trimester max, really impacts the high school, and that's an issue where some sizes, classes may be larger or smaller, but there's a kind of a collective number related to that. So that really is an impact as it relates to the classes at the high school level. The other kind of historical point on this slide specifically is this class size policy. In 2013, there were a few things going on related to not only class size, and school of choice was not as old, so to speak, as it is now, and we had discussions related to developing a class size policy, and because the collective bargaining agreement really addressed the issue of class size in a very black and white scenario. It's a contractual obligation on our part, it's a contractual obligation on part of the bargaining unit. The class size policy got into how do you manage it when you get to a spot. And so it started this concept of discussing managing percentage of overages, and so looking at the issue of class size in a holistic approach versus any individual class. And then this was the first time that I remember us having conversations around there's the component of class size, and again, as you look at, there's a graph and it says this is the number, either you hit it, you don't hit it. Class size is relative to the age of the student, class size relative to the facility itself, class size, the type of class that we have. And so, for example, if you look at some of the high schools, we have large bands, we have stacked classes, where we may have 2 classes going on simultaneously, but that has benefits. Type of instructional strategy, the expertise of the students. There are different aspects associated with class size that makes it not just is this a number or is it not a number? And so I think in some ways for over 5 years now, we've started to manage this in a way that we've tried to be smart and strategic in our development associated with class size and not just say it's either yes or no as it relates to numbers. The one thing this policy had talked about was that if we got to a point, what is the remedy to address it? And I think that's when I think about the end of the presentation, things I want to talk about a little bit are just at the end of the day, if we have an issue, what's the remedy to it? And because the immediacy of addressing an issue has implications as well. The next phase was in 2016 we developed a task force associated with it. Dr. Lotz was heavily involved in that. I think Mr. Bose was involved in that. And we got 20 parents, teachers, administrators together. The names are there. Who was involved in that. Many are still around, and we participated in this concept of, okay, if we were to think about class size as it relates to not only our instructional priorities, what is the impact on our students, and then certainly from the standpoint of how do we look at this in the standpoint of where does it fit related to the priorities we have as a district. And so while we do have that governing document, you know we are below those in almost every case, and in some cases significantly below. Those are kind of a governing document. We want to think, what are our targets? What are our desired ideas around class size? And so they came up with this idea of targets. And I will tell you, a lot of the conversation around that group that began meeting in the fall of 2015 and presented to the board in January of 2016 was really around this idea of what are the impacts, what are some of the decisions that we're making that have an impact on class size, and then what are some target, if you were to say, I don't say in a perfect world, but certainly in a desirable setting, what would be those class sizes that we would target at? And those are those recommended targets that you'll see there. One of the key issues that was discussed there was this issue of grade band buildings. Grade configuration and the configuration of our buildings have a significant impact on our class sizes. And so we have a perfect example this year as it played out. And I'll talk about the rationale as to why it's this way now. But if you look at, we have 3 buildings for 3rd grade. 2 of the buildings, the class size at 3rd grade are 29 and 30. Those are high class sizes. Higher outside of our range, those are high class sizes. At one building, they're 23 and 24, below or at the low end of our 3rd grade thing. At each of those 3 buildings, they're the same number of students. There's 119, 120, and 120, I believe. So again, each building has the same number of 3rd graders. The sole difference is that one building has 5 sections of 3rd grade. The other has 4 sections of 3rd grade. If we were to say, okay, we're going to have grade band buildings, and we're going to say Pleasant Ridge is a K1 building, Harvest is a 2nd grade building, and Woodland Meadows is a 3rd grade building. According to the way we assign students right now, immediately our 3rd grade classes this year would be in the 26 and 27 number. Closer certainly to those numbers that we look at when it relates to class size. We've made the decision as an organization, as a community, certainly as a board of administration, to say we don't necessarily feel like grade band buildings. There's some impacts associated with multiple transitions. There's a sense of cohesiveness that can be developed at times. Understand it has an impact on class size. We have prioritized neighborhood schools over class size in some ways because we know once we get all of our grade levels in one building, we can be as efficient as possible. Steve and I, Dr. Lotch and I, over the last decade that we've been involved with this, invariably, if there's an area where we are looking at, we have a lot of capacity in 2nd grade at this building. In August 28th, when I walk up to the counter to greet a family, they have a 2nd grader, and they're invariably not in that zone. It's just it's the way our system is set up. We have geographic regions associated with that. We do not have a transportation system or a community of 99 square miles that will allow us to get buses from one end to another and not have a real issue associated with that. So that's one of the issues associated, and I think that was one of the issues that the task force really, I don't say struggled with, but spent a lot of time on understanding what are those decisions we're making as an organization that relate to it, and then still saying, okay, we value the configuration that we have right now. We're going to develop some targets and understand that these are targets associated with that. And so when you look at this from a collective standpoint, the 10-year averages for the fall of 2010 to the fall of 2019, essentially, you can look at our 10-year average in kindergarten is 22.5. Note that on the bottom one is a listing of our averages over the 2015 to the current year, and you'll see those averages. Our average for 10 years is 22.5. Our average over the last 5 years is slightly below that, but basically 22.5. Our average this year is 23.1. The other thing to note as you look at those numbers, the task force prioritized the smallest class size at the youngest levels, and that was loosely based on, I think, some of the research associated with early childhood development in terms of saying that's how we feel like if we're going to prioritize sections for lower class size, we're going to start with our youngest students and move up from there. The task force did look at academic impact, did look at social, emotional impact, behavioral impact as it relates to class size. And the research associated with that does not speak to the difference between 23 students in a secondary class and 29 students. They talk about 13 and 17 in a class. Inherently, we know more kids, there are more issues. That's just part of the human condition in a way. But ultimately, as you look at collectively at the research, it does not speak to, historically at least, the issues associated with that. Again, I'm not suggesting that we don't want to continue to manage class size as effectively as possible, but that group, and again, it stands today that class size, at the numbers we're talking about, research does not stand to bear. And everyone points kind of to that STAR study out of Tennessee, which actually had some connections to Dr. Achilles, who was at Eastern Michigan University, a professor there, and they looked at 13 to 17 having a significant impact, and the biggest impact on students were at risk as it relates to that. So if you look here, you can see historically where we've at. 10-year average, 5-year average, and then a little bit about the last several years on there. Of note, you'll note Young Fives comes into play in 2017-18, so obviously there's not really a large sample size as it relates to that, and I'll talk a little bit more about Young Fives as it relates to it. This is class size 2019, and so on this graph, you should see every classroom we have across the district and their current, well, semi-current class sizes. The first number you'll know is effective the 23rd of August. That was the Friday before we started school this year, and those were the numbers of students in the class. You look at the October 1st one, which was just before our round and around count day, to see where we're at as it relates to that. A couple things of note. One is from what we anticipated to come until what we are counting, 11 students. So we do see, even our community students that we're intending to return to school that do not show up. And so when we look and say, well, why didn't we do some things? We know we're going to have students that don't show up. We did some tracking, and actually Miranda Owsley prepared some of this, looking at number of students who, this was their first time in Saline area schools this year, and I think it was over 500. That's inclusive of Young Five kindergarten and new moves in, and people who were here last year who are no longer here, people who essentially were enrolled last year and left, not counting our senior class, which we would anticipate all of them moved on. And those numbers from this year to the previous year were almost identical. And so we didn't see much transition associated with that. This 11 number over, I think, 57 sections is not uncommon. So again, managing that from the standpoint of where you go. If you look on the bottom are the heritage and middle school class sizes as well. Of note, I believe 20 of the 57 are inside the range associated with the targeted areas. So again, a good number are inside that range, and then, but again, many are outside of that range. And note, all are outside of the range within 1 or 2 students above the targeted range. There aren't any that are 3 above the targeted range as it relates to that. So the process, some people have asked, like, how did we get from where we were at last year where we're at this year? The first thing is we reduced what we call FTE. We reduced staff, and we did it via attrition. No one was laid off, but we have less certified staff, teachers this year on staff than we did last year. And as you note, relative to our current budget situation, that was done by design. That was a decision we made as an administration, as a board, as a community, to say we want to make sure that we're balancing this effectively and managing it. So setting that aside, we still have opportunities to kind of best manage our allocation of our existing resources. And so we look at straight line move up, and so we identify how many first graders did we have last year, and we anticipate those as second graders this year, and then we have what we call cohort retention. How many of last year's first graders historically become next year's second graders? In terms of, we have some grade levels that seem to see a spike, we have some that don't. For example, ninth grade, our number of eighth graders who exit Saline Middle School typically is significantly, and I say significantly, to the tune of 30 or more, smaller than what enrolls in high school. Families move to our community for ninth grade. Families that are in our community but have chosen other options, K-8 or even the middle school level, show up and enroll as ninth graders. And so we need to know that and anticipate that as it relates to staffing. And so we look at those kind of straight line move up, cohort retention. We look at kindergarten roundup and try to begin to anticipate enrollments. The one thing I will say about kindergarten enrollment is that it used to be kindergarten enrollment was kind of the bellwether of once if you had a number at kindergarten roundup 15 years ago, you could look at that number, historically tell you roughly where you were going to be at the start of school. Because enrollment is much more fluid, because information is much more prevalent digitally, in the past, again, 15 years ago, you had to go there because that's where you got your bus information. That's where you received a lot of information. Otherwise, you had to wait for mail or you had to come in physically. Because we have online enrollment now, we see a lot more people who simply don't attend kindergarten roundup, gather that information digitally, and then apply or enroll online. And so it's much more of a rolling scenario now than saying, hey, we're still going to continue to do kindergarten roundup. We think it's a valuable touch point for us related to those kindergarten staff or students, but it's not telling us as much as we would like it to in terms of X number shows up on kindergarten enrollment week and start to build a schedule or a model that's built off a number. It's just the way the society works now. Simultaneous to that, we're kind of developing those targets and saying, okay, if we were to align staff, how would it look? Where are we big now? Where do we anticipate some growth? Gets us to kind of that third grade issue. Why does Harvest have 5 third grades and Woodland Meadows and Pleasant Ridge have 4 third grades? Start of summer, Harvest had the highest number of cohort, had the straight line move up was the largest number, and we were anticipating, based on kind of our geographic growth pattern associated with rooftops, that Harvest was likely to see the majority of the enrollment in terms of new enrollment. And so we make a strategic decision to say that's really where we're going as it relates to that. You get to August 23rd, the buildings almost have the same number of staff. For us to take a staff member and move them across that would, we're just moving the issue in that sense. And so, that's a classic example where I always say now when it comes to enrollment and planning of that, it is an art and not a science. And I think, you look across the Southeast Michigan area, both Dr. Lash and I have as much experience in one community doing this over time and trying to manage trends. We do our best to try to make the best decisions, but ultimately it is an art and not something that can be considered a science in that regard. Simultaneous to all of this, we're in the hiring process, trying to establish who it is that we need to have hired, who do we need to interview and be ready to potentially hire. As you know, as a community, we've been hiring a lot in August, trying to make sure that we're making effective decisions. There's budget planning that continues to occur. There's new information. This year was a little bit of an issue for us and reminded us of years ago when we didn't have a real number. We had a projected foundational allowance that we needed to target. We needed to be appropriate. The idea of us missing that target could have pretty severe impact on our community. We needed to have a target, and so we set that. We didn't know the number, and so that, again, forced us to make some planning decisions based on an assumption versus a no. And would we have changed it? Probably not, based on kind of where it ended up, but ultimately it's an assumption, not a no. And lastly, while we do our school of choice lottery in June, and we select this, essentially have the students that are selected, offer slots, and they begin the enrollment process. At the K through level, they're not assigned until in the August window, unless they already have students in the district. If they already have students enrolled in the district, those students are assigned to the building, if there is such thing, where the building where their sibling is at. We keep our school of choice families just like our resident families stay together. So that's how we handle those. But that's what's taking place over the summer as it relates to trying to manage the whole class size issue. It brings me to kind of one of the bigger overarching things that is impacting class size for us. It impacts our budget and certainly impacts our configuration ideas and thoughts in terms of if we looked at ways, could there be some ways that we were start to split some buildings and do some things creatively to try to manage class size effectively. These are on there are listed 3 different levels. So effectively 20 years ago, 10 years ago, and today. You look at the number of school-age children enrolled in schools, both publicly and privately, in Washtenaw County. So there were 44,200 school-age students enrolled in Washtenaw County. Of note, back in the early 60s, there were over 50,000. So you think about this population of Washtenaw County in the early 60s, 50,000 kids enrolled in public education. So that gives you a sense of some issues demographically within this area. But ultimately, 44,000 20 years ago, that went up to 47. You can see the numbers of what we call our capture rate. Looking at, of those 44,000, we had about 4,800. That was going up. Our high water mark, actually, as a school district, was about 5,500 students in 2005, 2006. We were at 54, 74 in 08, 09. October of 2008, GM declared bankruptcy, and the economic landscape shifts. In addition to that, the demographics shift as it relates to birth rates, and I'll touch on that in a second. So now, the county actually has less students 10 years later. If you think about the growth that the communities, not only Saline, but other communities have experienced over the last 5 years in particular, we still have less students, K-12, in Washtenaw County than we did then. And think of all the additional rooftops we have in our community, new homes we have, less students enrolled in Saline area schools than 10 years ago. But if you look at our capture rate, again, we're in that 11% range. Essentially, 1 out of every 11 students in Washtenaw County comes to attend Saline area schools. And so looking at us kind of trying to make sure that we're managing that effectively. One of the underlying things associated with that is the age of our students. In the fall of 1999, there were 379 students in second grade in Saline area schools. This fall, there are 331. 20 years ago, there were significantly more second grade students in our community than there is today. And you think about the growth that our community has experienced in the last 20 years, and to think about the fact that our student population at the youngest levels, or where it's at, is just indicative of the fact that the population that comes to our community comes to us typically as they've already had children. They have children and they're moving to our communities. It's extremely common to have high school students move in, families moving in with 1 in college, 1 in high school, maybe 1 in middle school. And again, that gets back to that cohort retention game that we play to try to establish when are they going to move in and what do those grade levels look like. Conversely, 20 years ago, we had about just under 400, 390 students in the freshman level. We have 430 this year, so we have more students now. Again, they move in as they go. They are not in our system throughout, and that just presents us with some unique challenges as it relates to financially. It certainly presents us into unique challenges from a staffing standpoint in terms of trying to make sure we're running efficiently, and that's a good thing. But running efficiently means you don't have a scenario where you're going to just assign resources to new issues without meaning those resources are coming from somewhere else. They're not additional resources coming to play as we look at where they come from. And this is really the underlying aspect. Birth rates in Michigan are down. I don't know if you saw the article in MLive over the weekend. Literally, as birth rates go down, regardless of economic conditions, the likelihood of us growing as a community, as a state, as it relates to school is extremely challenging. There's just not the influx of young families who are looking to come to a northern climate, and as great as the economic boom has been, as strong as the Ann Arbor region has been over the last several years in particular, we're just not going to, without birth rates coming up, we're just not going to see the type of enrollment. Now, from a planning standpoint, that has some advantages. I will tell you the stability that we've experienced because of that, and while we're up and down a little bit in enrollment, we're not declining greatly, we're not expanding, that allows our focus to be on instruction, and I think that's a positive thing. When I think about the sustainability of our strategic framework as over instructional initiatives, that's our focus. We're not talking about closing buildings, and we're not talking about building buildings, and while those can be frightening and exciting in their own ways, our focus is on what we're doing with the students that are in our system, and that is one of the benefits of this. But just the idea that we're going to see new developments and we're going to grow as a community, I don't know that that's really that's a perception, maybe more than a reality with the birth rates where they're at. Next, from an enrollment standpoint, is just to look at what do we look at from this year, last year, fall to this fall. And so these are the numbers, as it were. And I'm going to say this is head count. Head count and what we call FTE, or full-time equivalent, as it relates to funding, are two different things. And I that'll be another presentation. I don't have time for that tonight, but effectively know that these are essentially the head count, the students that we have counted as it relates to our count. And it may fluctuate a little bit as we still are in the process of capturing some additional students based on attendance. But you can see kind of where things went associated with enrollment. Saline High School is down 44 students from last year. So you look at last fall to this fall, they're down 44 students. I mentioned we have 430 freshmen. We graduated over 460. So if you just say we're going to send out 460 and bring in 430, we're automatically down 30 students in a sense. How Pleasant Ridge and Harvest and Woodland Meadows saw declines in the neighborhood of 5%, and Pleasant Ridge saw a slight increase associated with their enrollment. Again, very challenging to manage. And you look at our building levels in terms of the 470 to 452. We're hitting the window in terms of roughly the same approximate sizes. But again, we're tracking to see what changes are taking place, why did that take place, and how do we best moving forward start to anticipate some of those things. I'll touch on a little bit. We have alternative high school. YA is our young adult program, which is our program for 18 to 26-year-old cognitively impaired students that operates here at Liberty School. ECSE is our early childhood special education program that operates down here as well. We're going to talk about that. And then WISD programs are programs that we partner with the WISD. YHI is the International High School. WAVE is the cyber school that is operated at the county level. ECA is the Early College Alliance, which operates at Eastern Michigan, targeting predominantly juniors to seniors, an early college model. Progress Park is essentially an emotionally impaired school that we have as a county. We operate as a county. High Point is a medically fragile program that operates at the Washington ISD, and then the WISD Young Adult is a young adult program similar to ours that they operate, and it has some advantages depending on we have a resident who has a location where they live and work. It's an advantage to them to be part of that program. So that's where that kind of one shows up there. So that's our head count. So when you think about Saline Area Schools, 5,319, 5,228. Again, we're talking bodies. We're not talking financial dollars associated with that. However, there's no scenario where we're hitting break even. So we're talking about 91 students that are not here. So what are our priorities associated with as a district in terms of how we manage some of these aspects? And so the first thing that obviously is going to be supporting students. So identifying students needing support. We're talking with our principals. We are continually looking at classes, and not that it's fundamentally different than what we do in the past. Certainly looking at identifying students that need additional support and then providing targeted interventions associated with that, whether it be academic support or social emotional support or behavior support. I think that, to me, regardless of whether or not you have 23 in a class or 27 in a class, really is a core component of how we want to go about addressing student need. And to say we're going to do something in a class of 27 and not do it in a class of 24 or a class of 23 versus 20, that's just not. We're looking at those individual students' needs, and we're fortunate to have staff and principal and building level leadership that really has honed in on processes to find that. At the 3 elementary levels, the other aspect of how do you manage a building to allow students to access academic content and curriculum and support learning are very much environmental, are very much about how do they manage themselves as individuals. And you think about the ability for students to learn. The environment plays a significant role in that. And so each of the buildings, in their own way, in 3 different ways, really have looked at that. And so Woodland Meadows is looking at Leader in Me. Again, those are aspects of how students take on responsibility, manage themselves associated with their behavior, and really interact with each other. Social thinking gets at the same core issues of, again, those kind of affect skills associated with being in a classroom with peers, understanding and communicating effectively at the elementary level. And then Pleasant Ridge is developing and implementing professional learning for the teaching staff around social emotional learning. How do we identify students that are struggling or may have some social emotional issues, and how can we best develop scenarios and encourage and support those students? And again, so I think it's indicative of the type of environment where we've identified a key lever to academic success is developing the environment that allows for academic success. And I think of buildings that do a lot of things around community meetings. I think some of these community meetings are fun and they're interesting. The ability to build a collaborative culture from an adult standpoint and from a student standpoint has a significant impact on student learning. And I think may seem like those are just fun and interesting ways to have, assemblies. There's a strategy and an intentionality behind that that I think is paying dividends for us, regardless of our class size, but certainly are important as we've seen the spike we've seen this year. Supporting teachers, I think one of the things associated, and this comes with a lot of discussion I've had with other superintendents in the area and beyond, about how do we go about building and balancing class lists in terms of trying to figure out what are the right mix. And this goes down to the idea of more of an art than a science. But our principals spend a lot of time trying to figure out how do you build classroom managing feedback you get from previous teachers, certainly understanding this essentially the strengths of the staff that they have, trying to coalesce around certain types of environments that would be conducive to learning for students that are coming up, managing parent requests. I think that scenario has a big impact on the ability for our classes to be successful. And as I've talked to a lot of our staff about the class size issue, one of the questions that I've had for them is, as you think about classes that have been a challenge for you over the years, have they always been your largest class? And many of them said, in fact, all, with one exception, said, I don't remember the large, I remember classes that are challenges because of the dynamic that has developed. And these are staff that have had, largely wonderful dynamics. So it's not like they all of a sudden forgot how to manage a classroom. It's that sometimes you have challenging dynamics. They didn't equate it to, consistently to larger class sizes, but they did equate it to the fact that it's critical to the extent possible that we are intentional in terms of building classes. Is that a science? And hey, if we put in these inputs, we're going to get, no, not all the time, but that certainly is a focus. And based on the feedback I get from other superintendents, it feels like we spend more time doing that and trying to balance that than in other communities. PBIS, which is our positive behavior intervention support system, we track behaviors and then develop supporting interventions associated with that. The behaviors that occurred 5 and 10 years ago shift and evolve, and the issues that we develop strategies to solve 5 and 10 years ago, we don't need to necessarily, those strategies are still in place. Other issues tend to pop up. How are we identifying those? And our PBS system at each of the elementary buildings is a way for us to really track that, monitor that, look at that data, build support teams between psychologists, social workers, and support staff to say, how do we go about understanding where are our key issues? What is happening during transition time? Again, those environmental concerns that I think I've heard a lot of parents express about how the building operates when we have a lot of kids in it. Those are the things we're trying to address, and I think we have a pretty strategic way about identifying those key behaviors. Not looking at things anecdotally by saying, hey, this is always happening, or this never happens. Looking, when we track that, what's really happening, and how, and more importantly, how are we going to go about supporting that with intentional interventions. The workshop model is just good instruction, but it certainly is conducive when you do have a few more students in your class, where we have, it's essentially a small grouping based on ability to allow our staff at the elementary level to provide direct instruction in key targeted areas and students that are grouped based on level. We do that in English language arts. Sometimes you hear about Lucy Calkins is a term that's kind of associated with that model. Expanding that to math, and again, looking at strategies to do that and supporting that in a way. Our instructional design support, many of you know we have 2 FTE, and technically it's 3 people, so we have 1 full-time and 2 half-time instructional designers that help support our staff. Their role really is about getting into the classroom, supporting the teachers, and I've seen a couple times this year where teachers have come and said, this is the issue I'm having with this class this year. It's not something that had we, in last May, planned out our year-long professional learning that we would have identified as something we want to make sure we provide some training in these areas. But it is something we can do shoulder to shoulder, kind of that just in time, and essentially provide them with a coach. This is an administrator. A teacher can say, I'm struggling with this, and not feel like, hey, I don't want to share a vulnerability with an administrator. Again, it's more of a peer environment that allows for that kind of interaction, and again, supports our student learning. First and second year cohort model. When I say first and second, these are first and second year teachers. Likely could be also referred to first year in Saline, second year in Saline. So not just first and second year people who've heard the last 2 years. We have a strong, and I really applaud Mr. Ellis and Dr. Lotcher on how they've developed something and now hand portions of that off again to instructional designers to be very intentional and supportive of our staff to get them up to speed as to what the expectations are in our community, where is it that they need help, what do they need to know, and doing it in a way where it's really personalized as opposed to, all right, everyone. We are going to provide instruction in Lucy Calkins to all new staff, but some may need some in areas of technology, some may need classroom management, Some may need, other aspects associated with parent communication. And there are a variety of issues that can become stressors to our teachers, and having staff available to help them is an important component of us helping them so that when they have a few more students in their classes, they can manage that effectively. The future. One is, I think this year, really continuing to monitor, and when I say continue to monitor, is to go back to look at the scenario as it relates to how are we supporting the specific students, are we seeing specific needs, and are we doing our best to make sure we're addressing those as quickly as possible and ultimately as effectively as possible. Next year, the budget plan for actually should be 2020, 2021, not 2020, 2019. Moving forward, what are we looking at for next year? Next board meeting on November 12th, we get our audit from last year to really see how we ended the year. One of the positives, I talked about our enrollment being down, and that's a concern as it relates to kind of closing the gap. One of the things that is going to help close that gap this year is the fact that our foundation allowance came in, we had budgeted $175 additional per pupil. Based on everything now, it's coming in at $238 more, which gives us the $81.33. There are things that are not associated with the foundation that we got last year, we're not getting this year, so I don't want to get into the deep dive on that. But no, that's a good number for us. That's an increase. That's more than we had anticipated. And the best part, really moving forward, is that's our new base for next year. I would say it's unlikely that we would see a reduction in that number, and so we can look at that and start to plan effectively associated with a number that is bigger than we even anticipated even a couple of months ago. Our enrollment target, really looking at that, that's something that I've already started to really look into to try to determine. We had thought we'd be flat to slightly increasing. That's been the norm. Over the last 12 years, we've had a couple of years like this where we're going along, chugging along at that, that flat to slightly increasing, and then we'll see a drop. And then historically, we've kind of crept back up, and then we've seen it. So, I need to look at that and analyze that a little bit deeper. Continue to think about and talk to folks about what are we looking at from a community standpoint as it relates. The silver lining to an enrollment drop is that when we build next year's budget, we have a higher foundation allowance than we started at this year, and our enrollment target, meaning the number of students that we're worried about if we were to say we think we might be down a few students because we see these birth rates, that's less likely because our numbers dropped. And so, again, while no one wants to see a significant drop, you always want to hit your targeted number. The next year, you just have a smaller number to get at. And so we found that, again, over time, has been something that's allowed us to build us some stability to make sure that the issues we're facing this year related to class size, again, or the spike issue doesn't become something that we're trying to figure out last minute to try to figure out moving forward. And then we have some one-time expenses, and we tried to be creative in terms of how we managed some staff attrition last year related to an early severance package. $150,000 of that we had in this year's budget goes away for next year. That's effectively 2 teachers in a sense, and those one-time monies go away. Potentially could be reallocated back into those positions. So there are things that I think are looking fairly positive for us to say, with some effective management practices and looking at this holistically, can we get to a spot where we could essentially reduce and get to where we're really in the meat of those targeted areas? The answer is yes. And this is not something where I'm looking at saying there's going to need to be some type of windfall or some type of one-time monies that would come into play in order for us to address it. There are strategies moving forward that I'm confident we can figure out a way to manage it. So, questions from the board? I talked a lot.
I have just a couple of comments financially. I know that the shell game that the state plays every year with our money is aggravating. Had they given us a number this year in June, that might have put a little different tweak on it, but maybe not. I mean, we make some strategic decisions. I mean, overall, if we don't have enough fund balance where we don't have enough money to pay our bills 52 weeks of the year and we're borrowing money, that's money that could go to the classroom. So there's a lot of nuances and things that go into play every year, which is also not a science. There's a little bit of art to that because you never know, what you're going to get. So that does sometimes come into play a little bit.
I think our interest this year, and obviously we're a public entity, we get very good rates, but I want to say it's over $100,000 in interest that we'll have this year. So again, if you were to think of a classroom around $75,000. It's a rough number. That's, again, another teacher in a sense. And so, you know, if you're in a situation where you're not borrowing money, you know, yeah, because we'll need to borrow money this year, so that's an ongoing annual expense.
And I just want to reiterate, I've seen some social media comments, bond money, sinking fund dollars cannot be spent on benefits and teacher salaries.
Yeah, I've heard, you know, that we've got a new parking lot, why do you parking lots not,
Right.
it just has, literally cannot be used for that.
We like to be legal.
Right, I guess it could be, but we do it one time, and then I'd be in jail.
Speed visit. A quick question. We do track instances of behavioral infractions and in-school suspensions, that sort of thing. Have you, Dr. Latch, done correlations between the class sizes and look for any spikes or unusual aberrations in the number of behavioral issues?
I've not looked at it recently, at least. Back in, would have been 7 years ago, we did a deep dive associated with academic and social emotional, or essentially behaviors. I did not see a difference in terms of the type of behaviors that occurred from one to another. So much as hard in terms of we have to be collecting the right kind of data. I will tell you, we do track a fair amount of the types of behaviors we're seeing, and we're seeing different types of behaviors. But I can't attribute, we were having these kind of different, more, what I would say we're seeing extreme behaviors. We saw it last year, we're seeing some this year. So, you know, to equate it to it's occurring in classes with more students, we don't have any evidence to suggest that. The deep dive we did in would have been 2015 didn't indicate that there was a correlation.
And was that on all grades? Because mostly we're concentrating on K-6, which is going to have a lot of different developmental challenges versus middle school, high school.
Yeah, we did not track, it was K-6 that we tracked. We did not track middle school, high school, because the issue there becomes too that they move from class to class, and so, you know, to say, you know, it's hard to say, well, they behave in Spanish, but they don't in gym. Well, historically, kids don't behave in gym, kind of thing. We do see there's certain, you know, types of environments that you end up getting more referrals out at the secondary level. But I would say, you know, conversely, we have a band class with upwards of 80 kids in it, and so you know, there's not a direct. It's the dynamic at the secondary level is so different. It's really hard to equate, you know, real cause relative to size.
Thanks.
I had a couple of comments and a couple of questions. First, I want to back up for a minute because I think this is excellent. I think there's a lot of good data. I like data. And I like that this was a direct response to community request. So thank you. I love the transparency. I love the fact that you're going to post and circulate this so people that couldn't attend tonight and were at work or clubs or whatnot, children's events, can participate. So I think that that's great. Couple of comments. When you talked about different buildings like Harvest being K1 or PR being second, etc. I really like the comment that you were cognizant and the task force in 2016 was cognizant of transitions between buildings. I think that's a huge, huge thing. And I think that's something, if we continue to look at this, that we need to be realistic about and the social, emotional, and physical well-being of the kids as they transition. It's a big deal between those buildings. And so if you had, you know, the bopping around of K1 and then to another for second, I think we lose some things, maybe academically, maybe socially, maybe emotionally. And so I think that's really important to be aware of. The other thing I thought that was really important was the history slide that you had and the relationship with the SEA. I think, like comments on social media with regards, like Paul said, about, you know, needing to fully comprehend bond money versus sinking fund and things like that. I think that relationship needs to be talked about a little bit more because I see it as a partnership in that contract negotiation, that those metrics were decided upon by all parties. And so that plays a huge, if not the most important piece of this pie, right? The most important is going to be the overall budget of the district. The second is the SEA contract.
Right.
I mean, so I think that that's a really important thing. One question I had is how do our class sizes, like in second and third grade, if I had to pick a grade, how do they stack up versus other school districts that we would benchmark against?
Runs the gamut. We did set what actually this year runs the gamut. In general, I would say districts like ours tend to, and I'm thinking, I'm not gonna necessarily express who they are, have similar types of issues where they tend to have these issues of spikes because they manage to a number effectively. I will tell you, we benchmark against Bloomfield Hills, Birmingham, and Grosse Pointe, those districts that are north of $10,000 per student. They have smaller class sizes. I would put a stake in the ground now. If we had $10,000 per student coming from the state, we would have smaller class sizes as well. So it's a little bit of a misnomer. Within the county, we quickly asked, I think one superintendent had an issue, and so we had a quick group text of where we're at, and we were lower at K and 1 and higher at second and third in terms of if you look at the mean number. Ann Arbor, interestingly, was all over the map because I think that just the ability for them to get students from where you talk about neighborhood schools, they have some that have relatively high, much higher than ours, and they have some that are quite a bit lower than ours as well. So it really does run the gamut. I will say, unfortunately, I looked at the communities that really needed, I felt could have benefited from smaller class size, didn't have it. Over the other kind of empathetic part of me that says there are communities that are struggling with this issue that really are going to have an exponential effect because the research did show, again down in Tennessee, that students that are at risk would benefit the most from a small class size.
Yeah. The only other comment and then question I would make is, I don't think anyone on this side of the table or on that side of the table or in the community wants large class size. Right? We're all here to do what's best for the students. And so when thinking about the future slide that you had up and sitting on the finance committee and thinking about the strategic framework that we have coming up and the re-envisioning of the compass and specifically goal number 4 around structure of finances, revenue generation, things like that, like what can we do? What can be the most impactful for next year? Because we don't want to be sitting here in the same situation next year, right? And to do that, we need more money.
Yeah, that's true, and I think it's one of those things. First of all, I think the idea of awareness associated with some of the financial constraints that how schools are living. I think that would be the one thing for us to kind of really, and I'm hopeful now because of the process that we have, that parents and community members are going to understand. If you look outside our community, the perception is Saline is an affluent district. We have a lot. I will tell you that we are virtually a base foundation district, and so the majority of our funds are the same as every other base foundation district. And so there's this underlying aspect that we're going to drive as much of our money into the classroom as possible in order to affect instructional outcomes. It's imperative that families understand that means we're making choices. And so issues of fees, I think of things like pay to play. I think of when people say, well, I don't want us advertising. Well, advertising is our dollars that we then bring in that cover expenses associated with other things. And so I think ability for us to be innovative in the way we think about revenue generation, and then when those issues come, historically what I've seen is people like the idea of revenue generation, but when you talk about a specific idea, it's like, well, that's distasteful because we're a public entity. There needs to be a balance there.
Right. And tie it to, okay, then what is the outcome?
Right.
So you just mentioned advertising. If we go down that road more or in a more structured way, what revenue does that bring in top line, and what does that equate to for headcount for surprise staff?
And you also have to consider, if we've got 10 more teachers, we don't have 10 more classrooms to make those smaller as well.
Right, and that actually was something that was missing out of here. I'm familiar with some of the buildings in our open classroom, kind of like I know Heritage, I know Woodland Meadows, but what are PR and Harvest with open classroom?
PR, two, I think Harvest and there are two, one has 3, Steve, or
Woodland Meadows has 3, right?
For which, for classroom.
Open classrooms.
Open classrooms. I think 2 and 3, and I don't know if it's 3 and 2.
What's that? Harvest has 2.
Harvest has 2 plus.
Heritage has 1, I think. Laura can correct me if I'm wrong. Woodland Meadows has 3. And what's PR?
3.
PR's.
I thought Woodland Meadows was 4. I mean, it was 4.
I don't know Michelle's.
Yeah, and one at Woodland Meadows has an activity in it that if we needed it, we would be a classroom. It's 2.
Yeah. So there's.
We have some capacity associated with it. The downside, one of the things with student, we talked about, when 44 kids exit high school, there's no real way. It's not like they're all 44 freshmen and they all took the same schedule, so now we're able to eliminate sections. It's a kid here, it's a kid there, it's a kid, and so it's a challenge from the standpoint of saying, okay, we're reducing headcount or reducing students. Shouldn't you be able to reduce a section here? It's really challenging, complex. personally, no, I will tell you historically, the staff is very respectful of me, and I tend not to get maybe some of the direct. Now, there are several staff that are very direct with me about how their feelings in areas, but I think, I asked the principals, are they hearing anything from staff? And they have not indicated they are. I think, we have a professional staff that almost to a fault will not necessarily talk about some of the challenges, and will dig in and really try to find a way to make it work. We're a competitive community, and we're a community that has high expectations, and so I think for staff to be able to articulate, wow, this is really a challenge, and I need help, we try to find peers to help with that, because I just, that's my cultural understanding of the organization. I have not gotten a lot of direct feedback. I'm starting kind of a coffee and compass tour in a couple of weeks, so maybe we'll get more, because I'll ask directly, what are the challenges associated with that? I will say, over the years of kind of managing the class size issue, several years ago, the situation in kind of that 13 to 16 window was worse in two ways. One, I think we collectively had larger class sizes, and two, there wasn't a path forward. There wasn't a scenario where we were going to get additional money from the state, and so then it was really a challenge. And I think when that was in play, the stress that put on the staff, the administration, the principals, when it didn't feel like we were going to be able to find a way to next year get to a little bit better spot, I know that put an added layer of, this is the new reality, and this is really hard, and how are we going to do it? So I think the fact that we're pretty confident that we can address this relatively quickly, I think Paul's like, we can do this, kind of thing. Again, I applaud our staff. I would, we provide them with some supports, but understand the people in those classrooms day after day are getting it down to the students, and I'm 100% confident that the students in Slater schools in 2019-2020 are getting a phenomenal education, K-6 and beyond.
Yeah, thanks for, pointing out the support for the students, kind of building that culture. I think that's great. My son is super excited all the time. He's like, oh, I gotta get there early. I can't miss that community meeting. So,
and you're at what? You're 28, 29, or 30 in your classroom?
Yeah.
Because you're quarter.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
I'm
It was
30.
hot. When I first
I'm
did it,
60.
I'm
Yeah,
30, 30.
yeah.
my head went
It
to.
runs great.
Yeah.
It really runs great.
Yeah.
But-
And then, yeah, providing, I think, the teachers and staff, that support, and making sure that, if there is an increased class size, like how are they feeling about it? I think that's, important to take.
I will get more feedback. This is, first of all, let's not judge. Anything happens at next week, don't hold anyone accountable for that, because it's the week of Halloween in these buildings. But ultimately, I think we're really getting to the meat of the school year. One is I'm going to talk just from a human patient. It's getting darker, longer. You're heading into holidays, which historically have been a behavior and stress scenario for adults and students. And so, this is a time where we really do, as an organization, dig in to try to make sure we're supporting our students. And so I'm anticipating that we'll have some things that are going to come up, but we're going to need to be ready to help over the next 8-10 weeks, because, again, it's going to be challenging. And that goes for every year, not just this year. So, I think you bring up a good point. It's going well. We need to make sure we are on guard for what's next.
Scott, zeroing in on the numbers, looking at the historical averages and the particular grades, grades 2 and 3 that really took the biggest increase from last year to this year. The others were up, but not nearly as much. Do you foresee that being addressed?
No, well, yes, I do. Yes, I see it addressed. I will tell you, our second grade class sizes this year, on average, are among the highest that we've had.
Yeah.
And I think that's somewhat of an anomaly. We did reduce sections in that area, and then, I think our straight line move up and our cohort retention, didn't hit where we wanted to hit. And because of that, those grade levels, that grade level is higher than it's been. Third grade has been one that we have seen very soon. We did reduce sections there, and as I said, we really are a spot where if we had 2 more staff, we would be at that 23, 24 across the board in terms of that third grade level. I think because we're talking 2 bodies in that scenario, to say we're going to be able to find a way to address that, I'm pretty confident we can find it.
We also have another number, the SEA number, and we're well within those. Well, we're within those numbers.
Yeah.
Did you come up with the SEA number?
No, that's those. Yeah, some of those. The elementary numbers haven't moved as long as I can remember, and so that goes back, literally decades, probably 30, 40 years in terms of those have been historical class size numbers at the younger. At the secondary level, we made some modifications and tried to think creatively about that. But yeah, those are not numbers. I will tell you, you know, when I talk to people who've been around, I mean, class sizes used to be much larger, but the context of instruction was different. The managed behaviors were different. I mean, it was a different world. But to have, you know, class sizes of 28, 29, and 30 at first grade was not uncommon in the 80s in Saline.
I mean, I also think it's important to note that Saline continues to put our money in our classrooms. I mean, we consistently, and I think we'll see in the audit that's going to be shown next week, we consistently put more of our money into our instructional than our kind of our peers in the district, within the county. I believe that's what the peer districts are that they rate us in. And Miranda was nice enough to kind of go through our adopted budget this year and kind of see where we're lined up, and we'd still kind of almost be in the higher side, if not the highest, based on those numbers, just some rough numbers. But so I think it's important to note that we value the instructional, and that's where we're putting our money. It sucks that we have a foundation balance, or foundation allowance that's so low.
From an assessment perspective, so 7 years ago, we had a certain, next gen was starting to come on. We've done different things in our classrooms for learning, instructional designers, the whole kind of thing. So from an assessment point, with more kids in the class, are there differences? I mean, it's a Steve question. Are there differences in the assessments coming in and out of the buildings with the kids? Or?
No, I would say it's similar.
Similar.
Yeah, there just isn't because we haven't been in a situation where like class sizes haven't gone up and kind of stayed up over time. At least at my perception, that's one of the things that has not put us in a spot where maybe we would be able to start to see a real negative impact. I think so. I told a few people, so my daughter, who's a sophomore this year, was in a class of 31 at Woodland Meadows 7 years ago, and I think about the experiences that the next year the class was slightly smaller, and the middle school teaming aspect developed cohesiveness. So there are so many scenarios that have played out that have made sure that teachers that have worked with it have had a positive idea that that having a high class size was having this detrimental impact. Just the numbers don't prove out that way. But it would be something that my conjecture is that over time it would be problematic.
True.
One more. I noticed that Young Fives isn't on the SEA contract, and I know that it's renewed in the past few years. What's the target number for that? Because I see PR at 20.
We treat it as kindergarten.
Oh, okay.
Yep, we treat it as kindergarten, and that's, well, I should say, it's considered kindergarten per the contract. Technically, those are kindergartners, so we'll get into it. There's a kind of a financial thing that comes into play there a little bit as it relates to that. So by definition, they're kindergartners. They technically go 2 years of kindergarten in the eyes of the state. And so we just, in our contract, we just call it kindergarten. One of the things is, it was interesting, and I mentioned this to Steve, because I looked at this 10-year window, there used to be a thing called EDO, and I would question who remembers what EDO stood for as it related to kindergarten in Saline several years ago. We had a thing called extended day option. Kindergarten was half day, and we didn't offer full day because the state would only pay or really what the state would pay the same for one student, but we had a financial model built on the teacher would teach one section in the morning and we get a full foundation. They teach another section in the afternoon and we get a full foundation. And so being able to just say, oh, we didn't have the finances at the time, so we developed a thing called extended day option where families could pay a fee to be in that classroom with that student or with that same teacher, and they had a little bit of a slightly different curriculum associated with that. But just, I think that was one of reminding me I'm getting old because I had done it and I'd forgotten about it already. But two, that there are iterations associated with how we best try to manage finances and educational experiences over time that we need to be cognizant. There may be an opportunity coming down the road. The state may try to incentivize something, and we need to be ready to take advantage of it.
It's creative.
Yeah.
Look at whatever.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very informative.
So again, we'll post this in a little bit and share it out. And no comments on my screencast. The best I could.
Consent agenda. Can I have a motion to authorize the following items as part of the consent agenda? A, approval of the regular Board of Education meeting minutes of October 8th, 2019. B, approval of payment of the general fund accounts payable of October 22nd, 2019 in the amount of $262,875.56. C, approval of payment of the Series 2 bond fund accounts payable of October 22nd, 2019 in the amount of $392,525.93. And D, receive and file the October Human Resources Report.
So moved.
And support.
All those in favor, please signify with aye.
Aye.
Those opposed with nay. Hearing none, the motion carries 6-0. Our next meeting, I know we'll have policy and finance committee reports.
The audit will be the lead item.
Audit would be the lead item, and
Student showcases.
potentially we'll have the Board of Education self-evaluation results back if 2 people finished it since.
Look at me.
I'm not looking at anyone. I don't know who they are. They just said only 5 were done the other day. So hopefully everyone's got that done. There's no more public comment. Our next meeting of the Board of Education will be held on November 12th, 2019 at 6:30 p.m. here in the Liberty School Boardroom. Can I have a motion to adjourn the board study session of Tuesday, October 22nd, 2019 at 7:44 p.m.
So moved.
All those in favor, please signify with aye.
Aye.
Those opposed with nay. Hearing none, the motion carries 6-0. Thank you, everyone.